The glycemic index, what it basically is doing is it's looking at a standard amount of food. So 50 grams of carbohydrate in a standard food, let's say carrots. So 50 grams of carbohydrate in carrots, how much that affects the blood sugar levels in comparison to 50 grams of carbohydrate from another standard food, and it's typically white bread, either white bread or sugar that they compare it to. So they compare these two and they come up with a number, and it's basically on a scale of 0 to 100. And the higher the number, the higher the glycemic index is, which means that it affects the blood sugar levels that much more so. A food that has a glycemic index higher than 70 is considered to be a high glycemic index food, meaning that it really affects the blood sugars pretty dramatically, versus one that's less than 55 is considered to be a lower glycemic index food. Now, one of the main fallbacks to glycemic index is it doesn't really keep in mind the amount of carbohydrate that is in that food item, how dense it is in carbohydrate. And that's where the glycemic load comes into the picture, and that does take into consideration how much carbohydrate is actually in the food. And when you think about, back to my example of carrots, you know how many carrots you have to eat to get 50 grams of carbohydrate from carrots? It's like about 10 cups of raw carrots, or about 5 cups of cooked carrots. Now, I don't know anybody, not even Bugs Bunny, that would eat that many carrots. So thinking about that glycemic load really comes into play with putting it into more realistic terms. So glycemic load is probably the more accurate one to look at. Unfortunately, the tables that you see in the articles and whatnot are mostly on the glycemic index, which I find just rather misleading in a real life situation. So problems with the whole glycemic index or glycemic load is one, looking at the reality of having a mixed meal. The other thing is it's pretty complicated to learn. It's much easier to go by the basic food groups, something that we learn from elementary school kind of thing. Believe it or not, fruit, which is mostly all carbohydrate, is a low glycemic index food. Milk, which has quite a bit of carbohydrate in it, is a low glycemic index food. Ice cream is a low glycemic index food. A Snickers bar is a low glycemic index food. Now, not to say that these foods are healthy and that I'm recommending ice cream and Snickers bars and that type of thing by any means. And that's where, again, just have to keep the whole picture into perspective here. Other foods that are low in glycemic index are oats, legumes, things like any of our kidney beans, split peas, black beans, that kind of thing. And then some of the foods that are high in the glycemic index are white bread, and that's why it's one of the standards that's used. White rice, potatoes, corn and rice cereals, so corn flakes, Rice Krispies, things like that are considered to be high glycemic index foods.